Hello and welcome to this webinar on the subject of sport and physicality, a holy encounter. We're going to spend some time today talking about sport and how we can use sporting activity and physical activity to introduce conversations about faith and spirituality and how we might start to develop a theology of sport and physicality. My name's Lynn. I'm going to be acting as host, so topping and tailing today's webinar. But the main presenters are John Boyd and Gareth Bennett, who work as part of the Methodist Learning Network and are also members of the 3Gen delivery team and have helped us in years past to think through issues of sports and physicality and how we encounter God through those things. So I'm going to start by handing over to John and we'll begin the day.
Great, thank you, Lynn. I'm going to give a little bit of a background to this webinar and how we got there. So if Matt, you could just start the PowerPoint, that would be great. So sport, physicality and faith. Perhaps an overlooked and undervalued topic in the church? Well, we are passionate about our involvement in sport, and we're keen to explore how our physicality connects with what it means to be human. And we want to understand how both these things intertwine with our faith. If possible, finding a language that works for all, both in the church and the wider community, capturing or embodying our thoughts and experiences around sport, physicality and faith. And in the context of the Methodist Church, what might this mean for us as we look to focus on our calling to respond to the gospel of God's love in Christ and to live out our discipleship in worship and mission? Go to the next slide, please, Matt. So how do we define sport and physicality? Sport is a huge arena, from the grassroots with amateur players engaging for fun to the elite professional sportsmen and women that dedicate their time to preparation and training. Sport engages all ages, all abilities. Watching sport attracts hundreds of thousands of people each weekend and creates community, identity, and relationship. Sport is a big part of the world today. Now, the term sport can bring to mind different images, thoughts, and emotions to people. Some will find the term exciting, evoking memories or anticipation of challenges to be overcome and testing themselves. Or some will find the term nauseating, instead creating feelings of anxiety, loneliness, and exclusion. We want to talk about sport with the following definition: an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. And if we move on to the next slide, Matt, we're just going to consider as well that whilst sport involves and requires physical activity, there are other activities that we can do that don't involve competition or entertainment. We would refer to these as activities that nurture and develop our physicality. So things like Zumba, Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, and so on. Now, all of these are activities with an aim of engaging us as physical beings to care for and to a certain extent manage our body. The motivation for engaging in these activities can be extremely wide-ranging. And again, if we move on to the next screen, Matt, we're going to think about the popularity of sport. We know that sport and physical activity is popular. We also know, or at least we often perceive, that church and faith is not so popular. We know that in the UK, our church numbers continue to be in decline, but as this time of lockdown has highlighted, there is a great interest in and an openness to exploring spirituality and making sense of our lives. Perhaps sport and physical activity might encapsulate what Richard Rohr calls the modern theology, with a strong turn toward participation, as opposed to religion as mere observation, affirmation, moralism, or group belonging. And I think one of the real beauties of sport and physical activity is that the focus is on joining in and influencing the outcome of it. If we go to the next slide, Matt, please. And being active is not just good for you physically, it has the power to do so much more. It can, for example, help prevent or manage medical conditions, reduce anxiety or stress, improve a person's confidence or self-esteem, or bring people from diverse backgrounds together. Sport England considers the benefit of being active to include health, social, and economic outcomes, and defines 5 distinct areas: physical well-being, mental well-being, social and community development, economic development, and individual development. And they state their mission as follows: we want everyone, regardless of their age, background, or level of ability, to feel able to take part in sport and physical activity. But too often, the people with the most to gain from being active are least able to take part. That's why we're on a mission to address this injustice and transform sport and physical activity so that people and places everywhere can benefit. We do this by providing expertise, insight, and funding that improves the nation's long-term physical and mental health. We believe that being physically active enriches lives, builds stronger communities, and creates a healthier and happier nation. Now, that's something I would want to be a part of. And to me, it gives a sense of spiritual well-being running through it, and a mission that connects with our calling as people of faith and followers of Jesus. And if we move on to the next slide, we're going to just think a little bit about sport and physicality in the Methodist Church and the history of our work with children, youth, and families. I believe we have a rich history of sport in the Methodist Church. Many of our modern day football clubs have their roots in the church. Aston Villa, Liverpool, and Everton, a few of the more well-known ones with particularly Methodist roots. The growth of MAYC, the Methodist Association of Youth Clubs, from 1945 onwards had a strong sporting element. Football, netball, table tennis, volleyball, amongst others, were a part of the culture of youth clubs and an important means of young people connecting with the local church and with others from around the connection through annual competitions. Now, as MAYC came to an end and a whole range of new and diverse sports and physical activities became more available, it seems that the church moved into more of a position of competing against sports and physical activities for people's attention, rather than seeing God as part of our involvement in sport and physical activities. Interestingly, at the same time, over recent years, there's been a growth in how society sees and values the wider benefits of sport. In particular, the idea of sport for development. Sport is being seen as a solution to issues such as poverty, racism, health, community cohesion, global sustainable development, even world peace. Now, is that a bit over the top, or is it close to reality? And is sport and physical activity much closer than we might think to our understanding of God, ourselves, and our church and community? If we just go on to the next slide, Matt, the last one was some football, this beach volleyball at 3 Generate, our National Children and Youth Assembly. And we've really seen growth in that event with children and young people over the last 10 years. And each year, the sport and physicality area is among the most popular areas for young people to engage with and choose to spend their time. The young people clearly enjoy and connect with the nature of the environment and the activities on offer. We've been working for a number of years on how we can positively challenge young people to reflect on, recognize, and connect with God in those activities and the sports that we offer. We do this in a number of different ways, but things such as offering reflections on and during the activities, sharing of personal stories and testimony, and challenging what incarnation of Jesus looks like in a competitive and physical environment. But it is clear from the feedback we've received that young people do connect their physicality with their faith. Now, if we look at the next slide, according to gov.uk in 2017 to 18, 62% of people in England aged 16 plus engaged in activity or exercise for more than 2.5 hours per week. If we compare this to the figure of 11% of the population self-reporting as regularly attending a Christian worship service, there does appear to be an obvious challenge to us. Can we help ourselves, each other, and our neighbours to connect our physicality with faith and spirituality? So if we just come on to the next slide again, the slide that we started with, this is actually a kind of draft logo that's been produced by one of our young people on the One Programme Connection scheme this year. And this is where we really hope that a renewed focus on sport and physicality can start to make a difference. And this is a first step in this webinar, but we're aiming to achieve a number of things. We want to introduce the subject matter to a wider audience. We want to begin discussions around this connection between faith and the physical. We want to introduce some concepts of the theological significance of sport, play, and physicality. We want to offer and raise awareness of resources that are available for engagement with children, young people, and families around sport and physicality. And we want to identify youth groups where young people have a passion for sport and physicality and engage them with resourcing and supporting reflection activity in this area so that they can contribute to the ongoing design and development of 3Generate. And finally, we're also looking for potential members of a national steering group who together can initiate further research, thinking, and engagement in this area. So a little bit of an introduction, but now a little bit of a chance to participate. We're going to take part in a poll. I think the poll is there in the chat. And the question is sport, physicality, and faith. What does this mean for you? Do these words, ideas, connect together in any way or conjure up any particular words or ideas for you? Sport, physicality, and faith. What does this mean for you? And as you put your words into the poll, hopefully they're going to come up in a word cloud on the screen. And we'll just spend a little bit of time to let that happen and then have a look at it. And just as perhaps the final word cloud produces itself, I'd just like us to spend a little bit of time in silence and reflection. So we're going to take 1 minute of silence to look at the word cloud that we've produced. I'd like this to be a time to listen and hear what might be important for us at this moment and how we might be connected to sport, physicality and faith, now, as well as in the past and the future. So a minute of reflection, and then I'll say a prayer at the end of that time to finish. Thank you, Lord Jesus, that you are running alongside us. Thank you that you are with us today to minister to us, whatever our need may be. Help us always to have the right attitude when problems come our way, seeing them as an opportunity to experience more of your power and grace in our lives. We thank you that through the life and death of Jesus, we are able to enter into your holy presence. Amen. So I think, Gareth, you're going to take us forward now.
Yes, thank you very much for that, John. My name's Gareth Bennett, and I work for the Learning Network down in Wales. I'm in Southwest Wales, so beautiful part of the world. I'm just going to go through a couple of bits of the kind of the first steps, really, in the thinking of the theology of sport and physicality. As John mentioned, it's a massively under-researched topic, you know, when you consider sport, physicality and faith. Obviously, big bits of research in other aspects of life. But hopefully this is the start of a conversation, and hopefully some of the things that we think about now, you'll be able to use as the start of a conversation with the young people that you're working with, that are engaged with sport and with physicality. So a little bit about me, first of all. So when I was growing up, playing sport and going to church or church-based groups, they always seemed to be in a bit of competition, like John was saying. Well, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't much of a competition, as it was always a clear winner for me. And I'm sure through absolutely no intention whatsoever, some of the people that I was working with in the church groups seemed to think, or at least give the impression, that the time I spent playing sports or doing physical activity was a bit of a misuse of my time, where it could have been dedicated to church activities instead. Now, don't get me wrong, we did a lot of activities in our church youth groups. You know, we'd play the games, we'd run around a bit, but then we'd most definitely do the serious business of the Bible slot. Now, I always really struggled with these perceptions, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, I loved, and still do love, I love playing games and doing sports and activities. It's a massive part of where I found my place, and a huge part of where I began to shape my identity. So to have this questioned as being unimportant or secondary, I found quite hurtful, to be honest. Secondly, I learned a lot from sport and activity. I found it to be extremely forming, and gave me life-lived examples of grace, of compassion, self-control, respect, tenacity, generosity, teamwork, and so on. These have shaped who I am today and were more practicable examples than the preach, but although thankfully sermons have improved, I must say. Thirdly, sport was fun. That's all I'll say on that. Safe to say, the impression I was left with was one of contradiction when it came to church life and sports and activity. Now, fast forward a few years, and I'm a bit older and more experienced, shall we say. I've realised that for me at least, my love for sport and activity was a part of how I formed a church. And I'll endeavour to explain a few of these things that have led to this thinking. So firstly, I work for the Learning Network in a Methodist church. And I've learned a lot about what it means to be a Methodist as a result of this role. One of the things that I don't think I really appreciated until recently was the bravery and the strength of the quadrilateral, one of the distinctly Methodist ways in which we try and discern and find our ground in what we do. We balance a number of things: tradition, reason, scripture, and experience, to try and discern the direction we should take and how we should live our life. This gives validity and credence to all of those facets. It means that what I've experienced, wherever that might be, can and should go into shaping and directing my thinking and my theology. All those lessons I spoke about, lessons in tune with the work of the Holy Spirit and its fruits, do mean something, and balanced with the other aspects of the quadrilateral hold worth. Now, this is something that I didn't quite see growing up. Secondly, and to raise a point from earlier, fun. Now, there appears to be something that happens within society when someone turns 16, 17, 18. And that's that life takes a sudden shift to being serious. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of people that would argue that this happens to young people earlier. There's a huge amount of research into play and the benefits of it for people's development, and godly play is one of the examples of how the church has developed these principles. Much the same as society, though, we tend to think of young people these ages differently. They might be encouraged to join the real work of the church, becoming members of the church council, leading sessions for young people rather than participating, taking responsibility for aspects of the worship, and so on. All of these things, speaking as a youth worker from a participatory perspective, are great. But are we still allowing the time for those young people, for those older, for us too, to play, to explore, to test, and to enjoy ourselves with a freedom? This freedom to enjoy is something I think we neglect to recognize as a holy moment. In a high proportion of the very few writings that there are on theology and sport or activity, they point to the poetry and the creation story. God calls us to firstly develop his creation, Genesis 1:28, and secondly to delight in it, Genesis 2:16, 17. Now, the first of these verses has been referred to as the cultural mandate from God, and the second speaks of what we can enjoy within creation. Within this second reference, we can often focus on the prohibition that's given, and for obvious reasons as the story moves on. But before this restriction is given, we're given full reign. Different translations put it differently, but essentially it's an instruction to look after and enjoy what the garden has to offer. One writer puts it like this: creation is not merely a resource to be used for productivity, it's a gift to be received and enjoyed. Now, this resonates so closely for me with Jesus speaking in the Gospel of John and beginning to explore what an abundant life might look like. This moves us nicely on to our next point. We've looked at developing and delighting in creation, but how often do we think of ourselves in terms of creation as a God? Fearfully and wonderfully made in Psalm 139, made in the image of God, Genesis 1:27. Scriptures that point towards the love and care placed on our very being. We've been given instructions to develop and delight in the creation around us. Why would the instruction be any different for us as a part of creation? In fact, it could easily be argued and justified that there is greater emphasis on how we steward, develop, and delight in our bodies and being. Now, this could be heard as a permission to indulge, but far from it. When we think of stewardship, we often place our emphasis on how we give and look after the things that have been afforded to us. I would suggest, however, that these scriptures make it clear that we need to think and include ourselves in this as ones with whom God saw and said were very good. Genesis 1:31. There are countless research studies that highlight the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, benefits far outreaching a purely physical development. Looking after our bodies, treasuring them as a gift, and using them as vessels to live life abundantly. Perhaps that's another way to think about how we love ourselves as instructed in Matthew 22:39. And definitely something to consider, I think, as we embark on reflecting on the Methodist way of life. Thirdly, competition. Now, there's no getting away from it. Competition is at the heart of sport. And if you're like me, even when you go to a circuit training session or a fitness class, you're secretly competing with the person next to you, trying to take dodgy looks at the speed they're doing on the treadmill, although I don't do that too much anymore. Perhaps when we think of sport, at the elite level especially, we could easily find examples of times when competition has taken over and people have taken on a win at all costs mentality. This is where performance enhancements, modifying equipment, essentially cheating comes into play. In the grand scheme of things though, this seldom happens at sport. For us, at the grassroots level, it's more often than not about testing ourselves, trying to be the best that we can be, setting, working for, and reaching goals. The nature of competition inspires these things. At the heart of competition, I would suggest there's more than a desire to win. We're entering into an agreement, into a covenant with our opponent. A covenant that says we'll play by the same rules. We will respect and honor each other. Now, I remember watching Usain Bolt when he really started to hit the sprinting world big time. And Michael Johnson was commentating. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with that, Usain Bolt was blowing the world away, much the same as Michael Johnson did probably a decade or so before. What Johnson was talking about in his commentary was that he wished he could have raced Usain Bolt. He was suggesting that we make each other better. The competition makes each other better. He wanted someone that would push him, someone that would make him work harder, train harder, drive him forward. When we compete in covenant with one another, we push each other to be more than we can be on our own. Much like how iron sharpens iron in Proverbs 27, someone to compete against with respect and humility can help us be all that we can be. Finally, and apologies as this has been a very brief whistle-stop intro, if you're interested in this thinking and more, I'd suggest some books, but perhaps a little reading on some of the early Celtic Christianity and spirituality research and writings as a start point. These have been really helpful for me, and it's interesting to see that they were talking 1700 years ago about the same things that we're considering now. So I hope that this has been helpful for you and thought-provoking. I would encourage you to test this with the young people that you're working with who are interested in sport and activity. See what they're thinking, test and play and compete with one another. And together we can encourage each other to be all that we can be. So as I said, that's a very brief kind of intro into some of the thinking and the theology with sport. What we're going to do now is we're going to hear from three guests that are going to share their stories of how sport and faith and activity have interacted in their lives and how they've come to connect all together. So we're going to start off by hearing from a friend of mine, Reverend Pete Taylor, who is who's a Derby County fan, but I'm sure he'll explain a little bit more than that as we go forward. So Pete, over to you.
Thank you for that affirming introduction, Gareth. Hope you can all hear me. Can I have the first slide, Matt, please? Thanks. And I suppose this is a typical picture for me. Yeah, that one with the crowd, that's it, the big one. That's at Pride Park in Derby, centre of the Midlands, in my opinion. And I'm taking that picture from high up in the family stand with my son. And I just love sometimes, I must have loads of pictures on my phone or videos of a crowd. I love the sense of being in a crowd and the passion and energy. It's not always there, to be fair, supporting a football team like mine, but you know, the highs are wonderful when they do come along. There's something for me about passion there. Football as a passion, football as a place of church, and liturgy. There is even liturgy, I'd like to argue, in sports crowds. And sport, as we've already heard, can be a force for good. It doesn't have to be this sort of thing that's a side subject. I've always loved football in particular, and I apologise to Gareth because when I went to Wales, I did have to relearn that there was another sport called rugby. And I did go to a couple of rugby games, so I can say that to immerse myself to that culture. Used to play it a lot, not so much now, but love watching it, particularly live as well. What I'm sharing really for a few minutes or so is really, I suppose, from an adult perspective, but I hope some of it will speak to children and young people and those adults who work with children and young people as well. Back in 2004, myself and my wife trained to be Methodist mission partners and were sent to serve overseas in Bulgaria for 3.5 years. And at our mission college in Selly Oak, I was asked by somebody, what do you like doing, Pete, away from churchy stuff? So straight away, no hesitation, I said, football. I love football. So they said to me, well, you've got a few months left in Birmingham. Why don't you get yourself somewhere and do a coaching course if you can? So I got to Aston Villa, a club with Methodist roots, as we've heard, and I got on a short FA Level 1 coaching course for 3 weeks. And looking back, I was so pleased that I did it. And I know it's a cliche, but sport is, I believe, a universal language. And when we arrived in Bulgaria, once I had learnt the language, which took quite a lot of time, I was able to translate some words from my coaching course and do some football coaching with some kids in an orphanage every Saturday morning. And it was a real way, a real door opener, if you like, to connect with the staff and the kids there as well. And I'll show you a picture, the next slide, please. And on the picture, you'll see a training session going on a very hot day, on a hot Saturday morning. And also the other picture where the children, if you think they're lucky enough to be in a Derby shirt, they were all shirts donated by the club's community side at that time. I did a football and faith event. I'll come on to that in a moment. And when I trained for ministry at the Queen's Theological Education, Queen's College, my dissertation was on football. And interesting to note, there was only one book in that library on sport and spirituality going back 12 years ago. I wonder if it's changed. My dissertation was, does a chaplain still have a relevant ministry and mission to football clubs? And so I managed to do some research and interviewed 4 chaplains across 4 very different football clubs. Interesting to note that 2 of the 4 chaplains I interviewed were quite involved with the club's academy. Youngsters aged from around about 14 upwards. And some chaplains, as I've read and discovered in interviews, have been actively involved with the academies in football and other sports, often being asked to lead life skills modules on topics such as disappointment, bereavement, handling success and failure, money, and relationships, as well as learning other skills as well, be that leading towards GCSEs or vocational skills. That to me sounds very similar to what youth workers do on a regular basis in churches and communities. There's something as well about, for me in sport, having character, discipline, endurance. They're all virtues instilled to young, aspiring sports people. These things will help them as they become adults, because as we've heard earlier, competition, we get competitive and it becomes more and more intense the higher you move up, particularly in the professional world of sport. A book that really helped me was called Sport and Spirituality, to understand that more. The sense of sport, psychology, the spiritual perspective, the unity of body and spirit. Time and again, that comes up in the book. One of the writers, Mark Nesty, makes the point that we have to be aware of the player, the person, as a whole person, and sport helps that. I know that if you think of that picture I showed of the crowd, that there's a risk of being, it's a bit hackneyed, but a live match experience for me personally has a real sense of devotion and worship. Perhaps it is for many thousands of people a holy encounter. The teams are in the tunnel, the fans are encouraged to sing louder, or they are at my club, as they await the team to come out. And that reminds me, there's not a lot different there in that experience to perhaps being at some live church event, whether that's Spring Harvest or Free Generate, a sense of passion and expectancy. And of course, whether you're going home from Southport or whether you're going home from church or from a football match, fans will spend the time dissecting what's just happened, just like people will dissect, young and old, the sermon or the quality of the worship. Can we go to the next slide, Matt? This is a picture from what I've called Football Fun and Faith Days. This was one to cheer Gareth up. This was done in Barry in South Wales during Euro 2016. And I sort of put together some resources from Scripture Union and Bible Society and other bits that I've picked along over the years and did an event. Interesting to note as well that I did that at the local non-league club, Barry Town, who I got to know some of the club officials through going to some of their games. And as soon as I said I'd like to do some event, they said, no problem, and there's no charge. You're doing this in the community. That made me think at that point, would some of my church bookings officers be so gracious? But it was great to do that in that space. We had a quiz, people wore their football shirts, as you see, and we also were able to watch a game on the big screen as well. And there's a slide after this one, Matt. That's recently 2 years ago when it was the World Cup at one of my churches in Notts and Derby district, where we had a football day, and they've got a fantastic screen and audio video facilities there So we had bacon cobs in the morning, we had a fun quiz, we had a short talk based on Hallowed Be Thy Game, and did some quizzes, had some more food, and then we watched France versus, I can't remember the name, but it was a World Cup game. We watched it all live and had a great time. Next picture, Matt. This is back in Wales. And for me, this is where the little things can sometimes mean a lot. My son loves football and was very keen to play for a football team, and so did play for a local team. And one of the coaches came up to me after one of the training sessions that I used to take my son to. He'd recognised me from a funeral service or a church service somewhere and said, it would be really good if you as the church could do a service for the kids to tell them about the real Christmas. That was no prompting from me. He came up to me in the car park and asked me. So, wow, praise God for that. We did a carol service. They did some exercises at the front of the church. We showed them a video based on hope about the Boxing Day truce. And each youngster received a booklet and some goodies and sweets from the church. Last picture, Matt, I think. Very briefly, this is Tom Lawrence, a player for Derby. And I think it's safe to say this person, he's 25, I think, has had an awful season. Pretty awful year, as the Queen once said. He was arrested in September after a team bonding evening out for drink driving. Received lots of abuse for that, quite rightly, you might say, as a responsible professional. But bear in mind lots of things, as I picked up from people. His mother died suddenly last summer. He gets lots of abuse on social media, gets lots of stick from some of the fans. He can't do anything to please them. And yet, as I've read in Sport and Spirituality, he's got on every day with the discipline and rhythm of a professional sportsman, worked hard to emerge as one of the better players of this season. So for me, football and sport can teach us so much, all ages in the church. It can be fun and it can be spiritual. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Pete. Much appreciated. Just a reminder to everybody, there's the Q&A function. So any questions that you have that you'd like to ask Pete, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we've got a little time for that before we finish. Before we go on to our final two contributors, we are going to take a short break. So we will take 10 minutes, just to have a little stretch of the legs and grab a drink if needs be. But yes, a 10-minute break. So we will start back at 28 minutes past 3. So thank you.
You girl, they say you wasn't wrong, and the second time I tried it, they say you want to be left alone. We had a lover's quarrel, yes we did, like all others do. I'm ready to make up. It's all up to you now, 'cause 7 days is too long without you. Come on back to me now. 7 days is too long, girl, without you, baby. Come on back to me. I refuse to break up because I'm alive. Mr. Finish Line. Mr. Finish Line. Mr. Finish Line. He's Mr. Finish Line.
She said,
Step one,
cut out the cocoa oil, then you
step two,
bring it to a boil, then you
step three,
cocoon it in the soil, then you fire, roast it, freeze and toast it, open up and shine.
he's Mr. Finish Line. And he's right on time. 'Cause when the lights go out, he keeps America online. He's Mr. Finish Line. Finish Line. Finish Line. Finish Line. Step four,
A bit perky on the mantle, then you
step five,
push up the accidental, tell you
step six,
you unlock your full potential while you sleep and dream and press and steam and open up and shine.
he's Mr. Finish Line. And he's right on time. 'Cause when the lights go out, he keeps America online. He's Mr. Finish Line. Finish Line. Finish Line. Finish Line.
I used to need defeat after step leader. Now I'm satisfied. I'm a regular eater. Oh yeah.
A feline saved by Stratton and Keeper. He rolls it out to Catsman, the spiritual leader and sweeper. A quick pass to Huckle. Great team ball over to Wong. Working their way up to Dart, the general. A mini everyone can get behind. He's flanked by Darsick and Goss. Stanley is streaking. Stanley with one to beat. Stanley with none to beat. Goal, goal, goal!
His straight back head. Finish line, his straight back head. Finish line, his straight back head.
That was cool. That was kind of dope.
That was my best take. Did you feel good take one, or did you feel like?
Yeah, I think one is my favorite so far.
Stole my children, left my son. Of all of them, he's the only one who did not mean that much to me. I tip my cap to the raging sea. Cover me up, I'm pale as night, with a mind so dark and skin so white. Is this the devil having fun? Tip my cap to the raging sun. Now all my rage been gone, all my rage been gone. I leave my rage to the sea and the sun. I leave my rage to the sea and the sun.
gonna take myself a piece of sunshine and paint it all over my sky, yeah. Be no rain. Be no rain. I'm gonna take the song from every bird and make them sing it just for me, yeah. Birds got something to teach us all about being free, yeah. Be no rain. Be no rain. And I think I'll call it morning from now on. Why should I survive on sadness and tell myself I've got to be alone? Why should I subscribe to this world's madness, knowing that I've got to live on? Knowing that I've got to live on. Knowing that I've got to live on. Yeah, I think I'll call it morning from now on. I'm gonna take myself a piece of sunshine.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good comfort break. We did have a question that came in over the break for Pete. And so, Pete, if you don't mind answering this before we move on to our next guest, why do you think okay. Why do you think chaplains were asked to lead the life skills sessions for young people as opposed to, and this is in air quotes, specialists?
So sorry, say that again about life skills. And
why do you think it was chaplains that were asked to do that and were thought to be best placed to do that as opposed to, say, specialists?
I mean, I'm going on a couple of the clubs I went to. One was Derby and one was Charlton, where both at that time the chaplains were asked to be involved with those youngsters. It seemed to be, from what the chief exec said to me at Charlton particularly, we feel these are people who experience all emotions of life. These people in the church, I think he said that word. We feel they'd be good sounding boards for these youngsters. Does that help?
Great, that's great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Pete. John's going to introduce our next guest now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Pete. Been great to have your input and perspective on things. Perhaps following on a little bit with the football theme, I'm pleased to introduce you to Tunde Shobiton, who's with us today. Tunde has been helping us with the volunteering at 3 Generate, the sport and physicality space, over the last 5 years. He's also been working for 3 of those years with Sunderland Samba FC, a community football club linked to the Methodist Circuit in Sunderland. And he's currently studying for a PhD in educational psychology. So it'd be great to hear from you, Tunde, a little bit on your perspective on that link between sport, physicality and faith.
Thanks, John. Appreciate the introduction. Really cool. Yeah, really enjoyed the presentation so far from Gareth, yourself, and also Pete. That was quite insightful. I guess I'll just keep it quite short, maybe just 5 minutes really, in terms of what I want to talk about. I think just growing up, football has been, the dream. I wanted to become a footballer. That was everything. Then this was in Nigeria. Then we moved to England. Of course, Nigeria, we have the best football players in the world, but we're just not recognized. Anyway, besides the point. So again, I grew up around a real football community from a young age. So it's all about football in my community. And moving to England, I felt like I didn't really have that chance to develop that because, again, a new culture, new environment, you don't really know people. You weren't really given an opportunity to really connect and play football. So I didn't really play for about 3 years, and I came to England when I was 12 years old. And I think for me, football passion really died there until a few years later, where I connected with another really great mentor who loved football and introduced me back into it, and I really fell in love with the game again. Then after that, nothing really came forward. I knew that I wasn't going to become a professional footballer. I was way, way, way below par to be able to reach that stage. So in a way, football just faded away. I played from time, but it wasn't anything significant. I went to university, studied, did my master's in community and youth work. Unfortunately, one of the professors on the program was a Methodist person, and he just put the application, and I just thought, oh my god, wait, what? Football youth work, this could be something. And I felt really God led me to Sunderland Samba Football Club. So do check our website, sunderlandsamba.com. And from there I started to, even from John, I started to learn what it means for your faith to be important in football. This thing I've thought, oh yeah, football is just one of those things. It's now become a tool to, not just a tool, but just a way to really express to other people what it means to be a person, what it means to enjoy football. Because I think by now footballers almost have left that stage of wanting to be competitive, be JJ or Kocha, score all the goals, do everything. Now, for me, football became something different, understanding, okay, wow, okay, God can actually use this football thing, or even use me as a person, as a youth worker in the community, to reach other people. And I'll talk about two things as well. The first one is the holiday football for kids, and the second one is the refugee community football that we do in the community. The first one, for the children, again, it's a chance for, we bring together, in Sunderland, the community that we have, and the different communities are amazing. Sometimes you won't even know, so during the holidays, we bring these kids together just to enjoy football. And when they come, you can see they're trying to be the best footballer there, but then after a while, they start to understand about being together, about serving one another, about being able to tone down that emotion. And we really, we connect with different faces in the community, different people in the community. And for me, it's just, I start to understand what sometimes God does. Sometimes one thing that you held so deeply, and so this is so important to me, and you let it go, and God kind of almost builds that into something amazing for other people. And even having the skill of football, I'm able to bring these kids into, it's not just about running around, it's about really enjoying it. When you get better, develop those skills, you really love football. And then, it opens door really to share my faith when they do ask, which is amazing. And the second one is the refugee football as well. And that, for 3 years, really constantly working on that program was just really amazing. We had refugee asylum seekers from different countries. And for me, again, it's about connecting with them. And, Jesus talks about connecting with a stranger. It talks about, when I was in the hospital, did you visit me? When I was, in prison, did you visit me? This sense of welcoming. And I really connected with that because, I guess from my background, coming to a new country, and I know also the challenges, circumstances it is for refugees to come into another setting. And I really thank God for the opportunity of the Methodist Church, seeing it as an important thing to connect and to be welcoming. And one of the words that really came out in evaluation with John and Samba, it's about journeying together. And I remember the guys would come into Sunderland. It's just Sunderland. I don't know what to do here. And we invite them to football. And we really build friendships that sometimes years later, the family, they're bringing their family over. We're asking them, oh, your wife is pregnant now. How is that going? And just the joy. And at the center of that is that football that brings us together, but it allows us to journey together. And we invite them to church. So I remember in one of the summers we did a constant lunch at the church, the local Methodist church, and it was really great to bring all these guys from different faiths together into the church to really just hear, the church is here for you, they're over here, you can come in anytime, they'll welcome you, they'll love on you and share the love of God with you. So for me, it's just been it's just been something I never thought was possible, faith and football. And I think even working with Samba really opened my mind up to the potential, even to what we do in Kenya in terms of actually, what is the best way to meet people, to see you, to share the love of God with them, and it's not about telling them you can't play if you don't know Christ, but we allow Christ to shine in the way we play football and the way we share that joy. And final point as well, it's also we do the 11-a-side football, and for me, playing as part of that team with the group of men, I think sometimes I don't really go for the football. Sometimes I feel like I go for the fellowship, to be able to encourage the guys that might not even know God, that God loves you, that God cares about you, to bring the young people into that football, to say, it is more than a football, it's that community. And sometimes we talk about real issues, suicide, depression, that affects most men. And I always get a chance. John always invites me to pray together with the guys, to encourage the guys. And for me, this would never happen really without that love of football. And I feel like God took it and really molded it and brought something out of it. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate the time to speak about this.
Thank you, Tunde. Thanks for sharing with us. I can't see any questions in the chat, but I've maybe just got one or two questions, Tunde, if that's okay. I think I'm just particularly thinking of the current times that we're in, and particularly with the Black Lives Matter developments, and particularly thinking of, as we've been watching the Premier League starting again, and all the players taking the knee, and they've got the Black Lives Matter logo or there on their arms. I'm just wondering what your take is on all of this, and perhaps where the link between sport and our faith and issues of race. I mean, you talked about that, your own experience growing up and the thing around welcome, but I just wonder if there's anything around race and how you think the church and Christians maybe could or should respond, particularly in a sporting context.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big question. I think even for me as a Black person, Black African person, it can be quite overwhelming, and sometimes you don't want to think about it because sometimes it can just be so overwhelming and depressing. I think with church in general, I think we just need to be open. I always found that in church, because sometimes we tend to just be like, it's all about Christ, and we don't tend to admit the systemic racism that are around us, or we tend to think, okay, it's just me, I'm not racist, but actually sometimes I heard people say it's not enough to be racist, you have to be anti-racist, and to challenge our own biases, even in church. Different churches I've been to in England, sometimes you see some biases and people say stuff, and I'm just thinking, I laugh sometimes, but at the same time, if I really took it serious, I'm like, where is that really coming from? So I think in church, we shouldn't feel like it doesn't touch us and we're not corporate or whatever. I think it's a society thing. Then when we get to the football as well, it's a whole new thing as well. Because sometimes in football, especially when you can play football with your teammate, they tend not to see you as, they're like, but you're part of us. And then it's the rest of the people I'm talking about when I'm being abusive and say, okay, I don't like foreigners. Or Tunde, you're not a foreigner. But actually, no, it's about just being open and having that conversation and knowing that it does exist, and and understanding the lived experience of people. Does that answer it, John?
Well, as you
say, way.
it's a big topic, but I think that's certainly helpful and a challenge to the wider church. I think particularly, it is all about the systemic racism that's there, and
Yeah.
how do we understand that for us as the church? Where do we actually experience that, and where are we? Where do we have to change, and how do we actually stand up in our communities to make a difference?
Yeah.
But great, thank you, Tunde. Appreciate your your insight, and maybe that's something else we can pick up on at a future date as well. We're going to move on to
Thank you, John.
next guest now, and that's Emily.
Someone said, I think there's a question there. Sorry, John.
Yeah, there's a question.
Answer it later.
So somebody was just asking about the practicality of the refugee work that Sunderland Samba do, and they were asking whether the refugees were referred to you. So how do you kind of find the refugees who could benefit from your work?
Yeah, I think we just go out, really. We go to City of Sanctuary, we meet people. I sit with people, I play tennis with them. And I think that's really caused one of the growth, really, because we just spend time and shake hands and how you doing, very open. And I think, yeah, that's it. We just go and find people. And sometimes we have Chris and Sonny would say, oh, have you met this person? Chris is one of the reverend there who works really with the City of Sanctuary. But generally, I think we tend to just go to visit, to attend different events, and we introduce ourselves. Sometimes we ask for opportunity to introduce what we do in the community, and through that, people connect with it. That's it.
Thanks, Tunde. So we move on to our final guest now, and that's Emily Truick. And Emily is a young person. She's been part of our One Opportunity scheme in the Darlington district in 2018 to 19. And she was part of running a project at Richmond Methodist Church in North Yorkshire. And I'm sure she's going to explain a little bit more about that and her experience of physicality and faith. So Emily, great to hear from you.
Thank you, John. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about my experience that I've had with religion and faith and sport. So when I left year 11 to go into year 12, our youth and families worker at our church came to me with this opportunity to be part of One Opportunity North East, which at first I tossed and turned to it. I kind of wanted to, I kind of didn't. What was I going to do as my project and things like that. I prayed a lot about it, and I decided to take the opportunity and go ahead of it, and I'm so glad that I did. I feel like it was definitely the right thing to do. So for my project, I've always had a flair for sport ever since I was in that year 4. I think it's been a ridiculous amount of time. So my idea was that I was going to do something sporty for my project. That was always like the generic idea that was going to underpin the whole thing. But it was just coming up with something like, what do you do? I come from a church where the majority of the congregation are quite old. So how do you mix sport and old people, and potentially old people who aren't open to new ideas? It can be quite hard. But I decided just to give it a go, just kept praying about it, and I set up a walking group where we'd meet at the station, which is quite a big tourist attraction in our area. We'd walk out from the station, go for a little walk, come back and have a cup of tea and coffee at the cafe in the station. And during that time, we'd have a bit of, it wasn't necessarily like a faithful chat, it was just genuinely getting to know each other. And as part of that walking group, I suggested that if some members wanted to, they ran the Couch to 5K with me. Sorry. So there was a couple of people who took that opportunity and decided that they would want to do the Couch 5K. Some of them did manage to completely complete it, and I was really proud at the end when they'd made that achievement. They were really proud of themselves. And in fact, I bumped into her in the street the other day, and from a bit of a distance catch up, she was telling me the route that she's walked every day since lockdown started and how she's been carrying on with what I sort of sparked in her, which was over a year ago. And the aim of my project was to bridge the age gap between like the younger members of the congregation and the older ones. because it's sort of quite segregated in our church. You know, the younger ones come in, they all sit on the front 2 rows so that they're ready to go out to Sunday school, and the older ones sit at the back. They all have their seats. It's like a little seating plan, you know. But so I really wanted to bridge that age gap and try to make a difference and a link between the younger people and the older people, even if it just meant that the older people just had a bit more of a positive outlook on the younger people almost. So the way I've always known to make friends and connections with people is by doing sport. I've been part of different teams. When I joined secondary school, it was the first thing I did, was went to go sign myself up for the hockey team, the netball team, the running team. And that's how I've always found my feet in friendship groups and sort of made new connections with people. So I decided that it was going to be sport that was going to be my way to bridge the age gap. And I definitely think it worked. It was hard at first. You're trying to bond with someone who you don't necessarily have a lot in common with, but at the same time, because they knew it was a church-related job, so they wanted to support me in my faith and my beliefs. And I was there because I wanted to hear stuff about their faith and their beliefs and, you know, learn about those things together. So it was completely connected us, even if everything else was completely different. I learned a lot during the year about the power of prayer, I would say. So like I said before, I prayed a lot about whether or not I should take the opportunity and take the job and do it. And I decided to do it because I felt that's what I was being called to do. And when I reflect on it now, that definitely was my calling. I should have done it. I'm so glad I did. I prayed a lot that people would turn up to the group and that they wouldn't be scary and they'd want to talk to me and things like that. And it worked really well. We ended up having quite a lot of people turn up, and a lot of people, even if they were too frail to walk, they became comfortable enough to ask whether they could just come for the coffee part. So then they'd just meet us at the end and we'd all have coffee together. And at one point, I think we drove the cafe mad because we had to sit on so many different tables because there's about 19 of us. I would say the thing I think when I first think about sport and physicality and faith, the connection I make, sort of, I remember playing hockey matches in the winter, well, all the time, but I remember this particular match in the winter, and it was about 4:30, it was after school. We'd travelled to York for the game. It was pitch black and the floodlights were coming onto the pitch, and it sort of, I just remember standing there ready to start the game, waiting for the whistle to blow, and just looking into the sky and just praying, just to ask question, just to enjoy it and get the most of what you can out of it. Sort of be nice to the people on the opposing team, even if you are in a competition with them. And I also remember when I was in year 8, I'd been running since I was in year 4, cross-country events and things like that. Then in year 8, I got asked if I'd run for, I did county trials and got asked if I'd run for county. That really connected me with God. I decided after I'd done that race I wasn't going to run competitively anymore, but that's meant that because I've then taken a step back from competitive sport, I've now found a flair for sports leadership and sports coaching, particularly for people with disabilities, where they're sort of needing extra inclusion into it, and the equality isn't always there. And I feel like it's my calling to make sport an equal opportunity for people with disabilities.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. I know we did lose you on a couple of occasions. So I think what we're going to do another video perhaps in the next couple of weeks, so we can make sure that we get all of that story and we can post alongside the webinar. But just a couple of questions as well, Emily, or maybe one. It was great to hear about the kind of that intergenerational side of the project, and how, well, what stood out for me was the importance of relationship with the people. And then you also talked about the importance of prayer and that side of your relationship with God. I'm not even quite sure what my question is, apart from, you know, I mean, that idea of the holy encounter, you know, is there anything in particular that you think just really enables that to happen in this sort of sport and physical context?
That's a tricky question. I'm not sure. I think it's, if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. If you've prayed about it, if sometimes you can pray about it and pray about it and pray about it, and you kind of don't feel like you've almost heard anything back. You're still at a bit of a loss with what to do. And then I think you just have to trust sort of what you've known before, previous answers to prayers, think about what it is that you want and just do it. And then I think your prayers are almost answered in hindsight, if that makes sense. So I'd sort of, there was times where I didn't really feel like my prayers had been answered. I didn't know whether to take the opportunity and do it. I didn't know whether to do it in a sporting setting. I thought, well, it's not likely that anyone's going to turn up and want to go for a walk, because if they did, why wouldn't they just do it by themselves in their own time? But most of them were female. They didn't want to be seen by other people in the middle of the day by themselves walking, and they didn't want to walk alone at night. Even though we live in a really safe area, they felt too scared to do that. So I felt sort of like my prayer had been answered about the reason why I should do a walking group, but after I'd set it up. So I'd just say that sometimes you just have to do the little push yourself to set something up and get it going, and just trust that you'll find out the reasons why afterwards. I'm not sure if that really answers your question.
No, that's fine. That's great. That's great, Emily. Thank you so much, Emily, for taking part and sharing, you know, your project and your experience with us today. I think, you know, it's really vital for us to hear from young people and, you know, enable more opportunities for young people to engage with the church and the community through sport. So we're looking forward to having you more involved as we go on the journey from here as well. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Hi, John. John, can I just say as well, I really appreciate what Emily has contributed. I think it's so, I mean, it's love the way she's talked about prayer and then stepping out. I really, really appreciate it. It's quite something I'm going to take away from. Thank you, Emily, for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tunde. I think Lynn's going to take us on now.
So I've got the job of bringing us to a close, and so I just want to start by saying thank you to John and to Gareth for hosting this afternoon, and also to Pete and to Tunde and to Emily for bringing some wonderful stories, all very different, all very insightful, and it's brought some real added value to the conversation this afternoon. So thank you very much for giving up your time, guys. I've just posted in the chat quite a long list of some resources. I'm just going to quickly talk through them now, just so you know what's kind of on offer. So we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available along with previous webinars and other really useful videos on the Well Learning Hub YouTube channel, and I've posted a link to that channel in the chat. You can find out about future online events at methodist.org.uk/well events, and also events when we can meet face to face again. There is a sports and physicality playlist on the 3Generate TV YouTube channel that's already got some great video resources on there, as well as some questions for reflection that you can use with young people. And I'd encourage you to check out that channel and that playlist. And there will be more resources added to that as we develop this work, particularly through the summer. Just to kind of highlight a little bit of a plug, this week on social media, the Children, Youth and Family team are working in partnership with the Joint Public Issues team and Transforming Lives for Good to shine a light on the issue of holiday hunger. Obviously, we are kind of looking forward to the summer at the moment, and we just want to draw people's attention to that issue and encourage churches to think about responding. And you can find out more about that at methodist.org.uk/holiday hunger, or find the Well for Methodist Children, Youth and Family Workers on Facebook and Twitter. That's it. That's all the resources I've got to signpost to. John and Gareth are going to add their email addresses into the chat. So if you wanted to be involved in a steering group or a think tank going forward that kind of starts to shape the work around sports, physicality and faith, then please do just drop Gareth and John an email. They're also heading up a satellite group helping to plan the 3Generate 2021 event that's going to be looking at a space called the Great Outdoors at 3Generate, as well as helping us to think about sport and physicality across the event. So if you wanted to be involved in that, then again, get in touch with John or Gareth. That's everything. Thank you for those who joined us today. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon, and we hope you found it helpful, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thanks.